Oh,
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to STL History Live, Mississippi Meanderings, High Water Everywhere, Blues, Gospel, and Country Music Response to the Flood of 1927. My name is Aaron Pelker. I'm a Community Engagement Coordinator with the Missouri Historical Society, and I want to thank you for spending part of your Thursday night with us. Tonight's program is the third and final part of a three-part Mississippi Meandering series in collaboration with the Mississippi River Water Trails Association. This program is presented in conjunction with the museum's current exhibit, The Mighty Mississippi, which is open now through June 6th. I want to thank both Bank of America and the JSM Charitable Trust who sponsor the Mighty Mississippi exhibit and the educational programming presented with it, respectively. I also want to thank the Zoo Museum Tax District and our museum members. Without your generous support, we wouldn't be able to host programs like tonight's. Next, I do want to mention that both the Missouri History Museum in Forest Park and the Soldiers Memorial Military Museum downtown are open to the public. Your safety is a top priority, and we would love for you to visit us if you feel comfortable doing so. Advanced free reservations are required and are available at mohistory.org. Lastly, before we get to tonight's presentation, I want to mention a couple of the features on Zoom you may find helpful. Closed captioning is available. To turn it on, click the closed captioning button on your Zoom toolbar. You can also submit questions for our speaker at any time through the Q&A dialog box on your Zoom toolbar. We'll do our best, but we may not have time at the end to answer every question. Tonight's presentation will also be recorded and made available on the Missouri Historical Society's YouTube channel early next week. Last, your feedback is always important to us, and we'd really appreciate it if you can complete a short survey that will automatically open in your internet browser. So please look out for that. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Melissa Sauter of the Mississippi River Water Trails Association, who will introduce tonight's speaker and program. Thanks for your partnership and for being here tonight, and enjoy the program, everyone.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Melissa Sauter, and I am the current president of the Mississippi River Water Trail Association. I would also like to thank two of our partners, the Missouri History Museum and the Alpine Shop in Kirkwood. The Mississippi Water Trail is a 121-mile long route down the Mississippi River, which starts near Saverton, Missouri, which is near Hannibal, and ends in St. Louis. The trail was recognized by the National Park Service in 2012 as part of the larger National Water Trail system. Our association is made up of a group of volunteers, and our purpose is to connect people with the river and surrounding shorelines. We hope ultimately that this connection then inspires the public to enjoy safe recreation on the river, and that this leads to a desire to protect all of the resources of the Mississippi River. You can find our Water Trail Association on Facebook, Instagram, and our website, MississippiRiverWaterTrail.org. Our website is loaded with lots of great trail information, including paddle trip descriptions from the beginning paddler to the advanced, an online river trail map that includes access points, rest sites, camping sites, and other detailed landmarks and features of the river trail. On our calendar, we have upcoming events such as our annual Paddle Fest, which we're holding this year on June 12th up at Riverlands in West Alton. We encourage you to register for membership on the Water Trail. Membership includes access to special paddling events, discounted paddling clinics, our newsletter, and a Water Trail sticker. Membership costs $15, and anyone who signs up between last October and March 31st, at the end of this month, will be entered into a raffle. This year, we have some really great raffle prizes to offer, including a private guided paddle for 4 along the Water Trail, Alpine Shop gift cards, and a signed copy of the book Road Tripping the Great River Road, written by our own Water Trail Association board member, Dean Klinkenberg. Now passing it on to Dean.
thanks, Melissa and Aaron. It's my pleasure to be with you all tonight. I'm also, as Melissa mentioned, I'm another board member of the Mississippi River Water Trail Association, And I also want to echo the thanks to the Alpine Shop and to the Missouri History Museum for the partnership on these last 3 series of chats. Normally, this is something we do in person, and with any luck, in January of 2022, we'll be back to hosting these presentations in person. So if you are interested in knowing about that, I would suggest becoming a member or checking our website or following us on social media. But tonight we're here to talk about music and the Great Flood of 1927, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. David Evans. Dr. Evans has had a double career since the early 1960s as a music performer and a researcher, scholar, writer, and teacher. He recently retired after 38 years as professor of music at the University of Memphis. Evans has authored Tommy Johnson, Big Road Blues, Tradition and Creativity in the Folk Blues, the NPR Curious Listener's Guide to Blues, and edited Ramblin' on My Mind, New Perspective on the Blues, as well as many articles, reviews, album notes, and LP and CD productions of traditional blues and gospel artists, many of them for the university's Highwater Records. His album notes have won 2 Grammy Awards. Since 1997, Evans has been the series editor of the American-made music book series of University Press of Mississippi, with more than 100 books published to date. Besides field work and recordings in African-American blues and folk music, he's done further field research, recording, and publication on the music of Venezuela, Ethiopia, and Malawi. As a blues and folk musician, he has recorded 6 CDs for the Inside Sounds and Blind Lemon labels, and has made over 70 tours in 23 countries of Europe, South America, and Africa. He has toured, performed, and or recorded with such blues greats as Hammy Nixon, Van Zula Hunt, Johnny Shines, Robert Belfour, Jack Owens, Jesse May Hempel, and Al Wilson. Evans learned most of his repertoire and style directly from these and other traditional blues artists he met in the course of his research. It is my pleasure tonight to welcome Dr. David Evans.
Well, thank you, Dean and Aaron and Melissa, and it's good to be with you. And tonight I'm going to speak about the 1927 flood and the blues, gospel, and country music recordings that commented on this great disaster. The flood that began in April 1927 is, by many standards of measurement, the greatest natural disaster in the history of the United States. It affected 16.5 million acres of land in 7 states, flooding 162,000 homes, destroying 41,000 buildings, making 600,000 to 1 million people homeless, drowning between 250 and 1,000 people, and causing up to $1 billion in economic losses. That's in 1927 money. Many of the victims were poor, and over 90% of the refugees were Black. The flood was momentous in other ways as well. It launched Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover, who was placed in charge of the federal government relief effort, to the presidency in the election of the following year, and it provoked controversy with long-lasting social and economic consequences. This controversy developed over the system of 154 racially segregated so-called concentration camps that was established in the entire flood zone, with Black refugees housed in tents under appalling crowded conditions. These camps were serviced by the Red Cross and patrolled by armed white soldiers from the National Guard. The worst of these camps was at Greenville, Mississippi, where 13,000 Black refugees were crowded into tents on the levee north of the town in a camp that stretched for 8 miles with an average width of 20 feet. Try to imagine that, living in those conditions. There were many other unpleasant incidents at a more personal level that reflected the racial disparities of the time. Even as the water level rose prior to the major levee break at Mounds Landing, Mississippi on April 21st, Black men and women were forced by armed whites to work on reinforcing the levees while white families fled the area. Many lost their lives when levees broke, and others lost all their possessions in the flood. Others were prevented from fleeing by plantation owners fearful of losing their workforce. Rescue boats often took in white refugees first and left blacks behind to be picked up later, if at all. In the refugee camps that were segregated, whites got first choice of the tents, the provisions, and the food. Whites ate at sheltered tables while blacks stood or sat on the ground and ate without utensils. There were reported incidents of shootings and gang rape by National Guardsmen, and there was a rise in lynchings in the wake of the flood. Black men were forced to work on levee repair and cleanup at low wages in order to receive relief provisions, and Black women were forced to clean the houses of white people at a pay of $1 per week. Finally, when the waters had receded and it was safe to go back to the plantations, Blacks were released only to the custody of their landlords. Even then, further relief supplies were given free to the plantation owners, who often charged them against the accounts of their Black tenants or held the provisions in the commissary while giving flood damaged rations to the tenants. These conditions and incidents were a reflection of long-standing institutional disparities between Blacks and whites in the South, which in turn led to different interpretations and understandings about the meaning of the flood. Most whites viewed it as a, quote, tragedy or, quote, natural disaster, an example of how God moves in mysterious ways. Their response was to rebuild the Old South and be prepared and vigilant against future tragedies. They felt that Black people should be grateful for the emergency relief they received and should willingly work on the rebuilding effort in order to repay their debt. Blacks, on the other hand, generally felt that the flood was a sign of God's wrath at the sins of man, especially in the regions most affected, and that the flood had wiped the slate clean, that the Delta was now a new land. For many, however, it was a land best left to the white folks to deal with, while Blacks would do better by moving north to the Promised Land. The flood of 1927 generated another flood of recorded topical songs in the fields of country music, gospel, and especially the blues. All of them, of course, genres of music that Southern people who are most directly affected by the flood enjoyed and produced. But before we examine these songs, we should first look at how the Mississippi River was represented in the mainstream popular music of America in the years leading up to 1927 and in the wake of that year's flood. Here we see a real contrast with its depiction in country music, gospel, and blues. Mainstream popular music tended to treat the Mississippi River nostalgically during the Roaring Twenties. It also associated the river with Black music, both the older spirituals, work songs, and minstrelsy, as well as the new jazz music that was sweeping the nation. A good example of this trend is the song Muddy Water, a Mississippi moan, composed by three Northern songwriters and published in late 1926. The song expresses nostalgia for the Old South's, quote, Dixie moonlight, Swanee shore, and its grand garden spots and life of ease and comfort. Yet there is an undertone of menace in the refrain that states, muddy water around my feet, muddy water in the street. Even during the period of the flood itself and up to the end of the decade, Old South nostalgia and benign images of riverboats, showboats, swamps, levees, roustabouts, and cotton bales predominated in songs with river themes. Among the popular songs of 1927 was Mississippi Mud, with the offensive refrain, and pardon these words, but I think it's important to hear them. They don't need no band, they keep time by clapping their hands, just as happy as a cow chewing on a cud when the darkies beat their feet on the Mississippi mud. It was quite a popular song. In fact, Bing Crosby was one of the singers of that song. Later in the year came the opening of the ever popular Broadway musical Showboat, which ran for an extraordinary 572 performances. Its key song was Old Man River. In 1928 came the offensive Dusky Stevedore with its refrain, "See my ragtime shuffling gait, happy 'cause I'm handling freight." In examining these songs, one would hardly think that the Great Flood of 1927 even took place, or at most that it was a minor disruption in the Moonlight and Magnolias image of the Old South. Now, moving on to our main topic, country music emerged as a recognizable genre or a market for recordings only in the early 1920s. One of its genres was the topical ballad, commenting on some current event, usually a tragedy, a crime, or a disaster. 3 songs in this format were recorded in 1927 about the flood, all of them by artists and songwriters from far outside the flood zone. Vernon Dalhart was a singer originally from East Texas, who was in a New York recording studio only 6 days after the levee broke to record The Mississippi Flood, composed by his partner Carson Robeson, who was from Kansas. The song's lyrics used the formula developed by Robeson for many of his earlier compositions about disasters, namely to paint a picture of peace and happiness, describe the sudden disaster, and conclude with a moral. In the flood song, he wrote, "The springtime flowers were blooming and the folks along the levee were happy all the day. Suddenly the skies grow cloudy and a mighty torrent falls from the sky, the levees break, waters rise, and the people begin to pray." In conclusion, the song states that we can't explain the reason these great disasters come, but we must all remember to say, "Thy will be done." And though the good may suffer for other people's sins, there's a crown awaiting where eternal life begins. Now, in May 1927, a song titled "The Terrible Mississippi Flood" was recorded by Arthur Fields, a Northern vaudeville artist whose real name was Abe Finkelstein and who occasionally recorded country music. Some of the early country music artists were not actually from the country at all. The song opens with a description of the sunny Southland, where the skies were fair and the people there were living in sweet repose. Then it gives a straightforward account of the flood's devastation, concluding, "Let's hope this great stream can be harnessed." The final country music song on the disaster was titled "The Story of the Mighty Mississippi," and it was recorded by Ernest V. Stoneman from Virginia. It sticks close to the standard formula describing, quote, "the Mississippi Valley just among those plains so grand." Then it paints a vivid picture of flood victims stranded in trees and housetops and concludes, "Let us all get right with our maker." These 3 country music songs all present objective descriptions of the flood with no sense of personal involvement by the singers or songwriters. And they conclude with the typical Southern white attitudes that God's ways are mysterious, that one should be prepared for death and disaster, and that it is desirable to try to tame nature and rebuild. A much greater response to the flood in song came from Black artists, who made a total of 19 recordings about it. All but 2 of these were blues, the others being a gospel song and a sermon. The sermon was recorded in January 1928 by Moses Mason, described in an advertisement by his record company as, quote, "Uncle Mose Mason, the singing elder from the Delta land." His short sermon is titled "Red Cross, the Disciple of Christ Today," and in it he compares the Red Cross to Jesus Christ, who fed 5,000 people with 3 fishes and 5 loaves of bread. Uncle Mose seems to have been viewed as an accommodationist by his record company, and in his sermon, he advocated rebuilding. However, besides Jesus Christ, Mason's praise is entirely for the Red Cross, and no mention is made of Herbert Hoover or the National Guard. In fact, he seems to contrast Christ's mercy with the stance of the National Guard, noting that Christ had no gun on his side. A gospel song titled The 1927 Flood was recorded in December 1928 by elders McIntosh and Edwards, assisted by sisters Johnson and Taylor. This was a group from Memphis representing the Church of God in Christ. The song views the flood as God's judgment against wicked man. It describes the futile efforts of man to reinforce the levees and how God poured out his flood upon the land. Let me read some of the lyrics. Many sacks of dirt was gathered, men worked with all their power, but the levees still was breaking, water rising more each hour. They did all they could do, but God's judgment must go through. Lord, he poured out his flood upon the land. He sent a flood to the land and he killed both beast and man, because the people got so wicked they wouldn't hear God's command. They prayed the water would yield, but for God they had no zeal, and he poured out his flood upon the land. The evil hearts of men have brought this land to shame, but God looked down from heaven to invade the Delta plain. It's we should be content with the flood that he had to send, and he poured out his flood upon the land. It was blues singers, however, who provided the greatest response in recorded song. And while they occasionally mentioned prayer to God, for the most part, they simply described the flood's devastation from the point of view of victims who experienced it personally. A few of the singers actually did experience it. Others had friends and relatives who did, and by using a first-person approach, all of the singers expressed solidarity with those who were affected. First into the recording studio only 4 days after the levee break was the very popular recording artist Lonnie Johnson. His Southbound Water seems to have been hastily composed and has a generic quality describing his valley home that was washed away and his escape to a nearby mountain. Needless to say, there are no mountains anywhere near the Mississippi flood zone. One of the greatest recordings about the flood was Rising High Water Blues by Blind Lemon Jefferson of Texas. The singer begins by expressing sympathy for the flood victims, stating, "Backwater rising, Southern people can't make no time." Then he states that he can't get any word from, quote, "that Memphis gal of mine." After describing water all in Arkansas, people screaming in Tennessee, he paints a picture of 1,000 people standing on a hill and, quote, "looking down where they used to stay," unquote. Then he focuses on a specific family of victims and finally on himself as a victim.
Mama wake up, I wake up, Papa said to kill us, Blackwater left us all alone. Blackwater daddy, I'm in my window. Blackwater laddie, I'm in my window. I leave with a prayer in my heart. Blackwater won't lie no more.
Sippy Wallace, another blues singer, recorded The Flood Blues on May 6th. She paints a portrait of herself standing in water, wishing for a rescue, and finally praying to God and her man for relief. She adds realistic detail about the sounding of alarms and the dynamiting of the levee. something that actually took place near New Orleans. These are some of her lyrics. They sent out alarms for everybody to leave town, but when I got the news, I was high water bound. They dynamite the levee, thought it might give us ease, but the water's still rising, doing as it please. So she's personifying the water there. Black vaudeville veteran Laura Smith had performed in Memphis and throughout the Delta and tri-state region for years. On June 7th, she recorded Lonesome Refugee and the Mississippi Blues. The latter is a rather generic account of a victim's sadness, anger, and despair, but Lonesome Refugee effectively turns the Moonlight and Magnolias image of the Old South on its head. Her lyrics go, once a rosy lawn, but now a muddy pond, floods the field of cotton and the sugar cane, and wrecks the shanties down in Pleasant Lane. I'm so weary, heavy laden and blue, with no one to tell my troubles to. I'm just a wandering, homeless, lonesome refugee. One of the most unusual blues on the flood theme, but also one of the biggest hits, was Mississippi Heavy Water Blues by Atlanta artist Barbecue Bob. His real name was Robert Hicks, recorded on June 15th, by which time the rising waters had turned to mud. His opening verses paint a stark portrait of a man searching for his woman who has been washed away in the flood.
I was walking down the levee with my head hanging low, looking for my sweet mama, but she ain't here no more. That's why I'm crying. Mississippi heavy water blue. Lord, 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 I'm so blue. My house got washed away, and I'm crying. I long for another payday. That's why I'm crying. Mississippi heavy water blue. I'm sitting here looking at all of this mud, and my gal got washed away in that Mississippi flood. That's why I'm crying. Mississippi heavy water blue.
After 6 stanzas of despair, however, the singer states that he's willing to settle for any woman who will, quote, slip me jelly roll and shake that thing with me. Barbecue Bob doesn't need to be taken too seriously as he was based far from the flood zone, but his song does call attention to an otherwise unmentioned consequence of the flood, the disruption of the sex lives of many of the victims. Alice Pearson of Memphis was another singer who recorded 2 blues songs on the flood theme in Chicago in July. Her Greenville Levee Blues is the more original of the 2, and it paints a picture of a victim in the town of Greenville, Mississippi, close to where the major levee break occurred. She sings, and you could hear people screaming all over town, and some was hollering, please don't let me drown. When the water was rising, creeping all up in my door, I had a mind to leave and I didn't know where to go. But toward the end of the song, she sings, living on the levee, sleeping on the ground, I will tell everybody that Greenville's a good old town. Now, what she meant by this last phrase is hard to determine. Was Greenville really good, or is she using the ambiguous Southern fresh expression, good old, as in good old boys? It's likely that she didn't want to reveal her true feelings about the place in this public expression of the blues. Bessie Smith recorded a blues about the flood on September 28th, more than 5 months after the levee break. Her original composition, Homeless Blues, is a remarkable expression of anger in which she sings, Ma and Pa got drowned, Mississippi, you're to blame. Mississippi River, I can't stand to hear your name. The Empress of the Blues, as she was known, uh, one of the highest paid artists in show business at the time, concludes by expressing solidarity with the lowest of the flood victims.
Homeless, yes, I'm homeless. Might as well be dead. Oh, you know I'm homeless, homeless, yeah. Might as well be dead. Homeless, it's just you know, hey, lay my head. Since I was beneath the plain old black road. Since I was beneath the plain old black road. I'm gonna stop my way to leave here and never come back no more.
I'll repeat the words. They might have been a little hard to hear over the music. Homeless, yes, I'm homeless. Might as well be dead. Hungry and disgusted. No place to lay my head. Wished I was an eagle, but I'm a plain old black crow. I'm going to flop my wings and leave here and never come back no more. Even over the 3 years following the flood of 1927, interest in the topic did not diminish among blues singers. In March 1928, Lonnie Johnson made up for his rather bland treatment of the flood theme in his earlier Southbound Water by recording his Broken Levee Blues. It's the most overt expression of protest against the terrible conditions of forced labor on Southern blacks in the wake of the flood. And I'm going to play the entire performance. I think the lyrics are pretty easy to understand.
I want to go back to Helena. The high waters got me by. I want to go back to Helena. The high waters got me by. I woke up early this morning. I water all in my backyard. They want me to wag on the levee. I had to leave my home. They want to wag on the levee. And I had to leave my home. I was so scared the levee might break out and I may drown. The water was round my window and backing all up in my door. The water was all up round my window and backing all up in my door. I'd rather to leave my home, 'cause I can't live there no more. The police run me from Cairo all through Arkansas. The police run me all from and put me in jail behind those coal line bars. The police say wake fire or go to jail. I say I ain't told no thing. Police say wake fire or go to jail. I say I ain't told no thing. And I ain't building no levee. The plank is on the ground, and I ain't driving no nail.
In July, an obscure artist named James Crawford recorded the Flood and Thunder Blues. It's mostly a generic description of a flood, but it contains a possible comment on heightened racial tensions couched in metaphor. His lyric goes, "Black cats whining, white dogs want a bite. Clouds are wide open, days are looking black as night." Crawford also incorporates an attitude seemingly borrowed from the religious sector in his lyrics. "Heaven's angry, someone's done some wrong. Trouble is spreading, been raining too doggone long." An interesting recording was made in June 1929, 2 years after the flood, by Joe McCoy, who grew up along the river in Vicksburg, Mississippi. His "When the Levee Breaks" presents a chilling portrait of a man working on the levee in pouring rain, quote, "thinking about my baby and my happy home," unquote, fearing the levee might burst at any moment, killing him and washing away his house below.
All kind of weapon, rain won't do no good. All kind of weapon, rain won't do no good. When I let it break, all you got to do. I work on left, on both night and day. I work on left, on both night and day. The work so hard, keep the water away.
I'll repeat those lyrics again. He sings, "Oh, crying won't help you, praying won't do no good. When the levee breaks, mama, you got to move. I worked on the levee, mama, both night and day, done work so hard to keep the water away." The last major recording on the theme came in February 1930, and it was one of the greatest and most vivid treatments. Charlie Patton was born around 1886 near Vicksburg and lived all of his adult life in the Mississippi Delta, where he experienced the 1927 flood directly. His "High Water Everywhere" is a chilling saga of confusion and flight to try to escape the rising waters. In the song, he mentions the towns of Sumner, Drew, Leland, Greenville, Rosedale, Shaw, Vicksburg, and Jackson as potential places of refuge, as well as a remarkable image of entire counties, quote, "drowned and inched over onto other counties." I'm going to play a little excerpt of his "High Water Everywhere."
I'm gonna move on the beat now. Oh, I think goodbye. We are water down on the road goes everywhere. The water flowing down the road everywhere. Boy, you can't help me out. I was going down the road now, but tell me it's water down.
I'll repeat those lyrics. His Mississippi accent might be a little difficult. Or he sings, "Now looky here, now at Leland, Lordy, the river was rising high. I'm going to move over to Greenville, bought our tickets, goodbye. The water at Greenville and Leland, Lord, it done rose everywhere. I would go down to Rosedale, but they tell me it's water there." This extraordinary body of song from the field of popular and country music, gospel and blues about a single natural disaster cuts through all of the historical and factual detail we have about the event and reveals the attitudes of individuals representing various segments of American society: the Northern white social mainstream, Southern whites, and African American religious and secular communities towards the greatest natural disaster in the nation's history. From the white mainstream, we see sentimentalizing, trivializing, and outright ignoring of the event. From Southern whites, we see concerns with preparedness, rebuilding, and reestablishment of the old order. And from Blacks, we see the greatest response with images of fear and anger, divine justice, flight, resistance, and often veiled protest. So thank you very much for your attention. And now if there are any questions, comments, I'd be glad to continue.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. I have a couple of questions to kind of get us started, and I just
Okay.
want to remind everybody that just drop your question in the Q&A box, and I will pass them on. But before we get too deep into that,
I know you're quite an expert on this topic yourself.
I don't know about that. If I am,
You've
it's
heard
mostly
most of the songs that I've
I have.
referenced. So,
And I think the paper that you wrote about it was a great resource. So do you want to mention real quick, like the name of the paper that you wrote and where that might be available?
oh gosh, let me see. It's called, let me see, it was called High Water Everywhere. I think it was, the subtitle was Blues and Gospel Commentary on the 1927 Mississippi River Flood. It's in a book of edited essays about blues. The name of the editor is Robert Springer. Well, actually, it's Robert Springer. He's French, although you wouldn't know it from his name. And the title of the book is Nobody Knows Where the Blues Comes From. It's published by University Press of Mississippi. And my article runs for the first 75 pages. So it's quite lengthy and quite detailed.
Great resource. And you cover a lot of songs, and there are some very helpful paragraphs deciphering the lyrics of some of these. As you mentioned, sometimes the lyrics can be a little hard to make out in some of those songs. Tell me a little bit about how you got interested in this and how you went about researching the topic.
Well, I'm a record collector and a blues historian, and I have a few of the original records, the old 78s, both the blues and gospel and some of the country music records, and even some of the mainstream pop records about it. So it had always been in the back of my mind, and I've done a close study of the life of Charlie Patton, the last singer that we heard. And so from that and trying to find out his degree of involvement in the flood, which I'm still a little bit uncertain about, but he was a Delta resident, and he sings as if he was very involved in it. I got interested in the general topic and had an opportunity to write this paper for this edited collection of songs.
Can you speak a little bit to something I've been curious about this for a while? There are a lot of times it seems like in cultures where certain groups of people don't have much of a voice, music is one way that can be used for them to have their voices heard. Do you think that applies to these songs from the 27 flood? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Very much. I think these singers were spokespersons for the entire Black community, and they gave a voice to the voiceless, to the victims of the flood, who sometimes they knew, and in a few cases, they themselves were victims, but they all treat, at least all the blues singers, uh, treated the flood as if they themselves were victims. They gave first person accounts. And this is typical of Black treatment of topical subjects, in fact. Um, the historical treatments of the flood generally don't pay much attention to the songs. Pete Daniel did in his study. I will give him credit for that. But the John Barry, whose book is probably the most well-known book about the flood, doesn't mention the songs at all. In fact, when I gave him a copy of my paper, he just sort of said, thanks. And I don't know whether he even read it, but he, it's unfortunate. I think the songs can be a great insight into historical events. And in fact, a colleague of mine is doing a general study of Black recorded songs about tragedies and disasters. It should be coming out soon, also from the University Press of Mississippi.
Let's see, we've got, well, somebody mentioned that, of course, the songs didn't really stop after that point in time. Randy Newman's Louisiana 1927 was.
Well, indeed,
treatment.
even quite a bit later, Randy Newman, a song that got quite a bit of listenership. Unfortunately, his treatment of the historical background of the song is quite lacking, but it's a powerful performance nevertheless. And it does call attention to a historical event that was long in the past.
So wasn't When the Levee Breaks, the song that you mentioned, I believe that was directly, let's say, inspired a Led Zeppelin song, right?
Well, yes, Led Zeppelin did a cover of it. It had been reissued on an LP by Candace Joe's musical partner, Memphis Minnie. In fact, a lot of people thought she was the singer, although it's obviously a male voice in it. But in any case, Led Zeppelin heard the reissue LP and evidently liked it and decided to do a cover of the song.
Are you familiar with the, let's see, the Great Flood DVD, the project called the Great Flood DVD?
No, I'm not.
Somebody mentioned that as an interesting project, so maybe that's something you and I both will have to try to track down.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'd be glad to help them on any of the music for it.
So do we know, let me ask you this. So what did the Black artists have to do to get these songs recorded, and how much did they end up actually benefiting from those recordings?
Well, most of them that recorded flood songs actually were already established recording artists. Some of them were big stars, Charlie Patton, Bessie Smith, Barbecue Bob, that we heard were all big stars. And so they just had sessions scheduled. Others just were discovered by talent brokers. There were people that owned music stores would sometimes recommend local blues and country music artists to the record companies that they think could sell records. And of course, if you had an artist in your community that was a recording artist, you could probably sell a lot of their records at your store. So they got recorded that way. And it's just, of course, the record companies were interested in topical songs. In fact, there's kind of an odd story connected with the Mississippi flood. Bessie Smith recorded a song about another flood in Nashville on Christmas Day of 1926 in her song Backwater Blues. She recorded that in February of 1927, and it was released just about 2 or 3 weeks before the big levee break in April of 1927. So great timing for her. The song doesn't give specifics about where the flood took place, and most listeners thought it was about the flood that was actually occurring, as the record came out. So it was a huge hit for her, and it probably inspired the record companies to record all these other topical songs about the actual flood. And then, of course, Bessie Smith came along later and recorded her Homeless Blues, which actually was about the Mississippi flood.
All right, we got a little help on the Great Flood DVD project, and I just posted a link in the chat for folks if you're interested. It's a musician, I'm not sure entirely how to pronounce his last name, but Bill Frisell.
Probably.
He's recorded, I am vaguely familiar with this. He recorded some music to some black and white footage from the flood itself. Bill Morrison, I think, was the filmmaker, according to the comment here.
Yeah, there was some silent news footage. I guess they showed it in theaters back in those days.
So I know this is probably harder to track down, but these were songs that were obviously recorded. Like, do we know were there? We know how blues kind of could be spur of the moment. Sometimes there must have been some songs about the flood that probably were never recorded that must have told some stories as well.
No doubt there were. There were about 4 or 5 records made about the flood that didn't get released for whatever reason. Some of them were recorded a few months later, and maybe the record companies thought that interest in the flood had waned. 1927, of course, was a momentous year in many respects. Babe Ruth broke the home run record. Lindbergh's transatlantic flight took place. And, there are a lot of things happening that year that people might make up songs about. But yeah, I'm sure people continued to make up songs about it, and some of these songs continued to be sung many years later. Of course, Bessie Smith's Backwater Blues, that so many people thought was about the flood, became kind of a blues standard. Barbecue Bob's Mississippi Heavy Water Blues has been recorded by several other singers. Even one white mountain singer recorded a version of it. So, and let me see, Bessie Mae Smith's song has been recorded by 1 or 2 other singers, or song mentioning Cairo. And yeah, it's been a theme that has had some legs, you might say. Usually topical songs don't last very long. They, new disasters and tragedies come up, and people sing songs about them for a little while.
What do you attribute the staying power of this theme to?
Oh, I guess because it was so widespread. It wasn't a localized disaster by any means. I mean, it affected, like I say, up to 1 million people. And you think of all the people that those people knew, almost everybody in the Mid-South probably had some personal or family connection to the flood, and they would have told their children and grandchildren about it too.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a personal favorite amongst that collection of songs?
Well, I guess Charlie Patton's blues, but most of the songs are really quite good, I would say, musically and as compositions. They've got lines in them that really get to you. Blind Lemon Jefferson, he was a great songwriter as well as a great performer. Bessie Smith, powerful singer. There's some great artists Louis Armstrong is heard as an accompanist on some of these songs. It's just, they brought out the best in performance and composition from these singers.
So which songs did Armstrong perform on? You know off the top of your head?
Let me see. I think he's, oh boy, you got me on there. I know he's
That's
on.
all right. I thought maybe that one
At
was
least one of the, well, he actually, he is on the Bessie Smith's Backwater Blues. But I'm trying to think if he was on Sippy Wallace's The Flood Blues. I think he was.
all right. We did have somebody mention, we've got a local radio station called KDHX. And every Sunday night, a man named Ron Edwards hosts a blues themed show. So you may have, we may have to see if we can hook you up to do an hour or so on that show and play some
Okay,
more of the
sure.
songs.
Sure.
Do you know of any particular place where the names of the songs are listed on the internet? Do you have a website where all the songs would be listed in one place, or maybe a playlist created for folks who want to listen to some more?
I think there is a website that has all or most of them mentioned, but I don't know what it is. Of course, my chapter in the book edited by Robert Springer would have them all listed, and the lyrics of all the blues and gospel songs. The country music songs I didn't give as much coverage to there.
So are you still actively performing?
Yes, I am, except I haven't had a gig since New Year's Eve of 2019. I got wiped out all last year. I am going to be playing at the what's it called, Juke Joint Festival in Clarksdale, Mississippi in April. I forget the date. It's a Saturday. Is it the 17th? I don't know. It's a Saturday around 1 o'clock, 1:30, I think.
Oh, great. I'm familiar with that festival. It's always there's always a lot of good music there.
Yeah, you can look up Juke Joint Festival, Clarksdale, Mississippi, and get the schedule. I'm there on the Saturday, a little after noon.
So are you doing a solo show, or are you playing with a band?
No, it'll be solo.
Because you also played with, I forget the exact name, but there was a jug band, or
Yeah, the Last Chance Jug Band.
right.
That was the gig, the last gig I had, that New Year's Eve gig.
So I know that for that band you did a cover of Mississippi River Blues.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that's a song that I do. Yeah.
It seems like that's a song with a very long history.
It is. It's probably one of the earliest blues. I learned it from a woman named Vanzula Hunt, who used to sing with tent shows. She sang on the Royal American Show. I don't know if any of the older listeners remember that, but she was up in age, but she was a real veteran, real trooper, you might say.
Fantastic.
And she was in the original version of our jug band.
All right. I see one other comment. Let's see. The radio station KDHX, again, Nothing But the Blues is a wonderful program with lots of country blues. And I know they simulcast on the internet. So when you've got some time to poke around, look for KDHX radio, and I'm sure the blues programs are listed on there and when they're airing.
Okay, and they're welcome to get in touch with me too.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Do you have any last comments or anything else you want to say before we call it a night?
No, just very glad to be with you. If you want to get a little more detail, check out my chapter in that book.
All right. Thank you so much. It was fantastic. I really loved it, and I loved listening to the clips. And I will hand it on back to Aaron.
All right. Thanks again to Dr. David Evans and to everyone at the Mississippi River Water Trails Association for their collaboration over these 3 Mississippi meanderings. that we've done the last 3 weeks. Be sure to check out the Missouri Historical Society's YouTube channel for the first 2 lectures in this series. They have already been posted, and tonight's lecture will probably be posted early next week. We have our regularly scheduled STL History Live programs on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. and Thursdays at 6:30 p.m., as well as Soldiers Memorial Challenge Chats on select Wednesdays at noon. You can see a couple of the upcoming programs on this slide on your screen, and you can find links for all our upcoming programs at mohistory.org, or on the Missouri History Museum's Facebook page. So please be sure to check out that lineup. And please don't forget to fill out the survey and let us know what you thought about our program tonight. So thanks again, and good night, everyone.
Good night.